Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy and I'm a bookseller and the events coordinator at Belmont Books. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. If you could all please keep your video turned off, that would be great. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including Hafisa Gator, and I may be mispronouncing her name, in conversation with Tyari Jones on January 13th. And we have another mystery event with EA Aymar in conversation with Hannah Marie McKinnon on January 14th. You can register for these and our other events on our website, which is belmontbooks.com. And that's also where you can purchase tonight's books, watch her, and leave no trace. We are very excited to welcome Edwin and Jen, also known as Sara. So if for those of you who don't know her, we can refer to her as either, I guess. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then I will turn the event over to them. Edwin Hill is the author of the critically acclaimed Hester Thursby mystery series, the first of which, Little Comfort, was an Agatha Award finalist, a selection of the Mysterious Press First Mystery Club, and a Publishers Marketplace Buzz Book selection. The second installment, The Missing Ones, was also an Agatha Award finalist and a Sue Grafton Memorial Award nominee. Formerly the Vice President and Editorial Director for Bedford's St. Martin's Press, which is also Macmillan. He now teaches at Emerson College and has written for the LA Review of Books, The Life Sentence, Publishers Weekly, and Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. Edwin lives in Roslindale, Massachusetts with his partner Michael and their Labrador, Edith Ann. Writing under the name Sara Driscoll, Jen J. Dana is also the co-author of the Abbott and Lowell Forensic Mysteries and the Canine Mystery Series. NYPD Negotiators is her debut solo series. Jen is an infectious disease researcher at a cutting-edge Canadian university near Toronto, but loves to spend her free time writing the thrilling and the mysterious. She lives with her husband, 2 daughters, and 3 rescued cats, and is a member of the Crime Writers of Canada. And without further ado, I will turn the event over to Edwin and Jen.
Thanks so much, Stacy.
Thank you.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Edwin. How are you?
I'm good. So Jen and I have met over email, and we did an event the other night together where we didn't actually talk to each other, but we are talking to each other for the first time today, and it's been great getting to know you and getting to know your books as we've been getting ready for this event. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your series?
Okay, so we're here tonight because of Leave No Trace, which is the 5th book in the FBI Canine series, which is a series that is set inside it's a real team inside the FBI called the Human Scent Evidence Team, which is part of the Forensic Canine Unit. And these teams are tasked nationally within America to deal with anything where you require live human tracking. So it could be natural disaster, people being lost. One of the books, Storm Rising, is set after a hurricane hits the East Coast. People are lost. They're trying to recover live victims. Sometimes they do suspect tracking. In the case of Leave No Trace, there is a bow hunter in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia who is picking off live human victims instead of hunting for animals. And so he, from a distance, is murdering his victims and then ghosting into the mountains. And so it requires tracking dogs to try and find this suspect. And so that's what Leave No Trace is about. And it's a real challenge because Georgia, the Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia, are beautiful and extremely treacherous. And so the teams that have to go out are not only at risk from the suspect himself, but also at risk from the environment. And so the series stars Meg Jennings, who is an ex-Richmond PD officer who has retired from that force and has joined the FBI. And so she is there with her Black Labrador, who's named Hawk, and they are a great search and rescue team.
Nice.
So Edwin, can you tell us about your book?
Sure. Well, and I will say I was reading Leave No Trace this afternoon, and it's super, super exciting. And
Thank
we'll
you.
get more into the book as the hour goes on. So today we're here for my book that just debuted, which is called Watch Her. And that's the third book in the Hester Thursby series. For anyone who's new to the series, Hester Thursby is a research librarian. She works at Harvard's Widener Library, and on the side, she finds missing people. She has a whole collection of people that sort of surround her, her little found family. This book starts when Hester goes to a party at a fictional for-profit college. For anyone who doesn't know, a for-profit college is sort of like it's like a regular college, but you have a board, and you're required to deliver a profit to that board. So that's the essential difference between a traditional school and a for-profit school. So this for-profit school is opening a big gallery in Jamaica Plain, right here in Boston. And Hester goes to attend a party there. And while she's at the party, she meets up with her friend, Detective Angela White, who's appeared in both of the previous books. And they are called away to investigate a break-in at a house in Jamaica Plain. And the house is owned by the family that owns the for-profit college. When they get there, Angela in particular starts to doubt whether there was an actual break-in at the house or whether someone's been making something up. And as they investigate whether or not there was an actual break-in, they discover a whole series of secrets and lies that go back about 25 years. They go back all the way to 1997. Sarah, I'm going to ask you about research, because as I was reading the book today, I could not believe the level of detail that you bring to almost every single page of this of your writing. You're in a location that you don't live in. You're in a profession that you don't work in. How do you research these books?
Well, I have to give some credit where credit is due, and that is to my writing partner, Anne Vanderland. So together we are Sarah. And we have this sort of, it's a little different partnership than a lot of writing partnerships where we do all the brainstorming and character planning together. I do 100% of the writing, then we edit it together. And here's where things get really good. Anne is a dog trainer. So this is where, because in the introduction, we now have 4 cats and we have a dog because pandemic and all the kids are home. That's my only experience since I was a child with dogs. So Anne rescues pit bulls, and she trains them to be, one of them is a therapy dog. And when we started this series, she and Kane actually went out and took nose work classes. So to make sure that we had all of the techniques sort of down. Now, from my point of view, I do a lot of it used to be book research, Google research, a lot of, you can find an awful lot about how to do dog tracking and everything online, but really Anne sort of really adds to that. So we get sort of the realism of how to do this tracking out in the wild. And it's pretty complicated. You have to understand like airflows and all of this kind of stuff and how to follow a scent cone. But yeah, so it's a team effort in getting the storyline and the technical details down in the book.
Oh, I bet. When I was reading it today, I felt like I was in Blue Ridge. It was very authentic. I've never been to Blue Ridge, but it felt very authentic as a reader.
Me either. I'm really lucky though, because Anne lives in Western North Carolina. But a lot of it, Google Maps is wonderful. And you can see so many people. We're so lucky that people go out on hiking trails and they take pictures of all of these places. And so you do enough research and you really can feel like you're there. So that really sort of added to it. Now you have a dog in your book. I adore Waffles. Did you have to sort of start bringing in that kind of thing? Did you have to do a lot of research around that yourself?
No, I've known many dogs in my life, and thankfully I'm able to bring many of their characteristics into these stories. I love dogs a lot. I thought about taking Edith Ann to nose work classes actually to see how that would work. But for this book in Watch Her, there are actually 6 dogs and an iguana in the story. So it was kind of interesting to see how you differentiated canine characters from each other in a single work. And for my work, I really look at how the animals interact with the humans. They sort of illuminate the human beings.
Right.
And sort of work hand in hand to kind of create character. So for example, in my second book, which is this one, which is called The Missing One, there was a dog that sort of appeared at the very end of the novel, called George. And he's like a scruffy ragamuffin that nobody loves. But Hester's partner, Morgan, is a veterinarian, and he always takes care of animals, especially ones that are in need. And so I was really curious. I was really interested when I was doing book tours for that book. The one character that universally readers said they loved was George, and sort of the transformation and how George, like Morgan's character, was illuminated through George as a dog. And so I brought George, but it was important to bring George back for this book because I thought readers would want to know what happened to George. And in between the two books, George has gone to live with Hester and Morgan's friend, Angela White. And I used him in the same function here. He doesn't have a large role in this book, but he really informs Angela's character, especially in a pivotal scene toward the end of the book.
Well, and I'm sure you'll probably find too, like I do with my readers, is that the humans can get hurt. That's okay. But if you don't touch the dog.
Oh God, no.
No,
Never touch the dog.
No, the dogs have to. I occasionally beat the dogs up a little bit, maybe because, they're in bad situations. But that's the one thing I will never do, is none of the dogs will ever die in my books, because I couldn't live with it. Forget about my readers.
I know. I once put Waffles in peril, and everything was fine.
Okay, because then
Yes, but I haven't done much
or the
beyond
dog
that.
needs rescuing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your dogs.
So in the FBI Canine series, there's actually 4 of them. And so they are all slightly different. You have Hawk, who is a black Labrador. Labradors are really well known as being, I had one as a kid. They're fantastic family dogs. They tend to be a slightly lower level of aggression. They tend to work really well with kids and with people who are injured. Then Lacey is a German Shepherd. German Shepherds are really sort of high drive dogs. You often see them in police procedurals where they are patrol dogs, because they also have a slightly more, sometimes a lot more aggressive side. So they can be used as patrol dogs or apprehension dogs. We also have a border collie named Rocco. Border collies are also extremely high energy dogs, and they are just go, 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 go. And then the last dog that we have is a bloodhound named Theo. And if anybody's ever had a bloodhound, they are fantastic nose work dogs, and they are hard as heck to get moving. So they tend to be kind of low energy. And so luckily he has a handler who knows how to kind of kick him in the butt and get him moving. But there are, bloodhounds are, when they're not working, Theo's down on the ground with his ears flopped on the ground, because he's just, it's nap time. It's time to take it easy. So all the dogs do have very different personalities. Hawk is very sort of placid, unless Meg is in danger. If that turns his aggression level up almost immediately, because dogs are very protective of their owners.
Sure.
And at least when you're working with dogs like that, the handler dog bond is like the cornerstone of the entire working partnership. They have to be really connected. And so you don't, go home and send your dog off somewhere for the evening. You are with your dog 24/7. And that's how that bond, develops and stays strong. And training, you have to train them every single day. You can't just take a day off and go, my dog's pretty well trained, I'm just going to let it go for the day. No, it's a daily kind of thing. So I sometimes get the question like, boy, these dogs are really well behaved. Is that really realistic? Well, yeah, it is actually, because they're working dogs, and this is exactly what they are supposed to do. On the topic of research, though, I'm really kind of curious, because I almost always write female protagonists. If I write a male sort of point of view, it's sort of like an addition into the book, because I need, basically in third person limited, I need to be able to convey that information. You're writing a series of books from a female point of view. So I'm sure you've had this question before, but what were the challenges for you as a guy writing realistically from a female point of view. I loved her in Little Comfort. She's a fantastic character. She's not perfect. She's got flaws, and that makes her interesting.
I get I think this is a really interesting question. I think as fiction writers, our job is to inhabit our characters and to present authentic characters. And so when my path to my first book was a very long one, and I worked on it for quite a long time. And when I was writing it, for anyone who hasn't read it, it's about Hester winds up trying to find this guy named Sam Blaine, who's a serial killer, and he has a partner named Gabe DePercio. They're both bad guys. And when I first started writing the book, it was about Sam and Gabe. Hester wasn't actually part of the story. And I was trying to make sort of like an anti-hero story. So I was working on it for a long time, just sort of off and on, not very seriously. And at one point I decided I really needed a protagonist. I needed something positive in the story to make it go forward. And at that point I came up with Hester, and I just had in fact, I worked on this book so long that I often forget some of the steps that I went through, but I remembered this the other day. When I decided to add Hester to the story, I already had two men. I had Gabe and Sam. And I thought to myself, I really don't want to write a book about three guys. So I'm just going to make the protagonist a woman. That was like my entire decision-making process. So I added this character in. I didn't really know much about her at the time. I knew she was 36. I knew she had a child. And I just started adding little bits and pieces to her life to fill her out. And so how do I write from a female perspective? I observe, back when I was still working at Macmillan, I'd observe the way people were going through their lives, the decisions they made. I'd talk to people about like what their hopes were and what their fears were, and try and listen for what differences might be there and stuff. And then I also, obviously, I use beta readers to make sure that I get this right. So I always ask, I write all of my books from multiple points of view. So Hester is one character, but there are usually three other characters, and they can be from a variety of different backgrounds. They are never me. That would be super boring to read. And so I have to do that for all four characters. I have to find a beta reader that sort of represents who that person is, and make sure that I'm presenting an authentic, realistic, or a character that feels real on the page. And so it winds up being, I do feel like I mostly get it right when I'm writing, but I love the feedback that I get from the beta readers, because it's always these tiny little adjustments that I add to the manuscript, and they're just little things here and there that would have felt wrong to a reader, and it's so nice to be able to catch those and see them corrected.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. Like right now, so I've now written the canine book that follows Leave No Trace. That book is in the hands of my beta readers. And so, I mean, I always say to them that I want them to rip it apart limb from limb if it requires it, because I would much rather that they find the plot holes than my editor. And they come to it with different perspectives. And so one of my beta readers is my husband, and he's my sort of logic checker. He's the you got to be kidding me kind of guy, right?
Yep.
Like he's always the one who finds the plot problems like that. I've got one person who is, sort of the English language major. I've got one person who's all about characterization. And so having beta readers like that, I find really, really helps. Because it sometimes it needs someone outside of you. You think you've explained it perfectly logically, and it's because they're not in your head, they don't get it at all.
Absolutely. Yes, that can happen a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us, I was getting to know Jen/Sarah before we joined this, and I learned some things that were really fascinating to me. Like, she writes 2 books a year, but talk to us a little bit, and she works full time in a big job. Talk to us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, my process, it's very fast, because it kind of has to be. So I write 2 books a year. Luckily, they're both with Kensington, and they're both with the same editor. And that in itself, I mean, I got the copy edit for the book that's coming out in August this week, and I have on February 1st, the book that follows Leave No Trace is due. And I mean, she hands it to me and she goes, please let me know if this doesn't work with your schedule. And that's nice, so that I have somebody who's greatly understanding. But yeah, so I spend 6 months on a book. I give myself 4 weeks to plan, 10 to 12 weeks to write, and the rest of the time is, I do an edit, then it goes to my critique team. They have it for 2 weeks. It comes back to me with about 4 weeks to spare. I get it done, hand it off, and immediately start into the next book. So there's no break. I just roll, from one to the other. Now, luckily at this point, I'm going to be moving into the third book in the NYPD Negotiator series in February, and then after that, it'll be the 7th book in the Canine series. So I'm lucky that at this point, I'm not coming up with new characters. I'm coming up with new situations, and especially for the Canine series, it's sort of like sliding into a familiar skin, because at that point, the characters. And so it's a lot harder when you're earlier on in the series and you're trying to sort of, your first book, you think you've got the characters nailed down, but then in the second book, you're sort of playing with them and seeing where it goes. So it's a pretty fast process. And I'm a lab manager in a COVID lab running 2 national randomized clinical trials for COVID. So that's my day job. And so that takes up a lot of time too. So I don't watch any TV.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
how about your
avoid
process?
wasting time, right?
Well, no, there's no time to waste, and there's not a whole lot of time for sleep.
Yeah.
What's your process? I mean, you're teaching, so it's not like you're sitting at home doing nothing.
No, so just real quick, for anyone who hasn't used, I know everyone's used Zoom at this point, but there's a chat button down at the bottom. If you click on that, the chat window will open up on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can add any questions you might have for either of us. Mine is a little bit messier than that. I'm not good at outlining, or sometimes I'm good at outlining and sometimes I'm not. My novels are really, really, they're like puzzles, and sort of figuring out figuring out who the 4 different voices are going to be in the novel and who knows what secret is sort of the beginning part of my whole process. So I go through this exercise, which is super frustrating, but I do 40 days of writing, free writes in a row,
Oh, wow.
where I try to get it's basically doing NaNoWriMo. If anyone's ever done that, I don't do it during the NaNoWriMo month, which is November, but I basically forced myself to do 40 work days of writing. So at the end, I have 80,000 words. And out of those 80,000 words, I always think of that as sort of my lump of clay. And out of that 80,000 words, I figure out, besides Hester, who the other 3 point of view characters are going to be, what the main storylines are, sort of what the arc of the story is. And then I go back to the beginning and I start all over again.
Oh, wow.
So I think it might be more
outline. You do an 80,000 word rough outline.
Basically, yeah. And I think it might be more efficient if I just sat down and did an outline. I was successful doing an outline story one time, and it was basically just 1 page where I had like maybe 20 bullet points, and I wrote it based on those 20 bullet points. And it came up, I haven't actually tried to sell that book yet, but it was a very easy read and it just came to me pretty.
I highly recommend bullet points.
I know.
That's how I do it. It almost sounds like you need isn't it the snowflake method, where you write, like a paragraph of the whole book and then you break it down a sentence at a time and each sentence becomes a chapter and that kind of thing, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you go.
Oh yeah, I could never do that.
I haven't tried that. Yeah, for me it's a point form kind of thing. Although, do you find, I mean, I guess if you're writing 80,000 words, like for the book that I've just finished writing, there's a huge chunk in the middle that just was never in the outline. It just sort of, and when I try to outline, it's almost more like milestoning. You want to hit sort of the big plot points, because especially in a mystery, if you don't have the plot points sort of set up ahead of time, it's going to be a mess at the far end. But then that leaves room to take a big left turn partway along. I don't know, maybe police procedurals are a little easier to write in that respect than sort of the psychological thriller that you do.
Well, I definitely plot. So mysteries tend to be told in 8 parts. So if you sort of, I always think of it as a TV series, like a limited TV series, and you think of each section of the book as being 1 episode of the 8-episode TV series. And so I try to give an arc to each episode of the series, basically. So something, basically, you start at the beginning, you try and you work towards something exciting, and then there's a big question at the end of of that section of the book, so that keeps your reader wanting to keep reading. And so I try to work out what each of those 8 things are, and I do that through this drafting process. But really, the challenging part for my books is actually figuring out what the big pieces are, and again, who knows what. And when I start with my 80,000 words, I don't know who those other 3 characters are, and they sort of come out of that free writing process. It is messy and it is not efficient, but it is what works for me.
But it works.
So we have a question over here for you.
Matters.
When do you find time to write in your day, morning or night, Jen?
Definitely not morning. I roll out of bed and get to work in the lab. So no, I mean, back in the day before the pandemic, when, I had a regular sort of 8 to 4 work day, I mean, people would see me on my lunch break, madly typing away. I would work at lunch. I would work after work. I would work after dinner. My day stops at 11:35 when Colbert starts his monologue. And that's kind of my regular sort of thing. And then it's a full work day, right up to 11:30 on Saturdays and Sundays too. So it's just sort of the way it has to be. Now that the pandemic is here, and then at least for us, I was out of the lab proper for probably 3 months before we started having samples from our clinical trials coming in. But the problem was that everybody's workday, now that you were working from home, your workday was basically from when you rolled out of bed to when you got back into bed. And so it definitely made it harder to actually get any writing in because we were working so hard to get these clinical trials up and going. And even though everything's now going and sort of established, it's still, I don't know, a lot of people I think who were working from home find the same thing. It's really hard to have a defined workday anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's not as easy as it was. Definitely after dinner is almost always time for writing, although I have been in the lab sometimes after dinner these days. So it's not as straightforward as it used to be. Did you find that the pandemic sort of affected you, Edwin, as far as whatever were you writing? What were you writing? Were you writing the next book, or were you writing Watcher during?
Well, I was writing I finished Watcher right at the beginning. I finished Watcher and handed it in to my editor in February. And then just the bookmaking process is a long one for anyone who doesn't know it. So you hand your manuscript into your editor, and then your editor gives you edits maybe a month or a month and a half later. So I handed it in February, and then at sort of the end of March, I got edits from my editor. And at that point, the world had really changed at that point. So I asked myself at that point, do I want to incorporate what's going on in the world? My books are told like they take place right now. Watcher takes place beginning March 31st and ending April 2nd of 2021. That's like how it's planned out. So I was like, do I want to try and work what the world looks like into this novel? And I could have if I wanted to, but as I tried here and there, and then I was like, nah, you know what? I really want to live in a world like my fictional world. I want my fictional world to be one where there are cocktail parties and where this story takes place at a school. I want kids living in dorms. I want them having fun. I want all of that stuff to be back to normal. So I wound up not changing it. But I did find, as I was doing my edits, I found certain things really stood out in the sentence. So if you had someone shaking hands, it was like there was like a spotlight on the shaking of hands, because of course now we're all so nervous about shaking hands. And so I did go through the manuscript and I cut sort of that type of physical contact between characters, just so that it wouldn't stand out like that. And I probably won't do that with my next book, but I felt like at this point, where we are right now, I felt that was appropriate. And oftentimes when you're having people shake hands in a novel, it's just to give like an extra beat in the sentence or something like that.
Well, I totally understand, because I mean, I don't know if you're watching a movie or TV or something, and you see a big group of people standing together and you're thinking, don't do that,
Absolutely.
So
I know.
Yeah.
And then I wrote this manuscript that's not complete, but that's the one that I outlined. And I wrote it very quickly. And it was really fun. And now I have a book due to my editor, so I'm working on that one instead. Yeah. And I'll turn back to the one that I was working on. So I had this really big creative burst of energy at the beginning of the pandemic. Now I'm back to normal. How about you?
Well, that's different. I mean, I know I've heard from readers, and maybe the people here tonight will sort of attest to the same thing. I've had so many readers who just said, I had so much trouble reading through 2020 because how do you read when the world is on fire and everything is trying to catch your attention? And it's hard to sort of relax and settle into a story. And I kind of found that the same thing kind of happened to my creativity. There was so much going on, and for me, there was so much pressure from work too, that I found it hard to sort of kick that creativity in. And when I don't know how you do your drafting. I draft everything in Scrivener, which is a piece of software meant for writers or for screenwriters. And you break everything down by chapters and everything like this. And when I put it all back together again, I'd actually left myself a note in one of the chapters, reread for pandemic brain, because I knew that whole chapter, I think I'd started it like 8 times because I just couldn't get into it because I was having trouble sort of settling in and focusing. And I think a lot of readers had the same kind of problem. It was hard to, I know a lot of people who are dedicated readers who would, like be way up high on the Goodreads sort of like reading lists, and they did a fraction of the books last year because it was hard to concentrate. So I made the decision in my books, there is going to be no pandemic. I'm tired of it. I'm done. I work with it all day in the lab. I don't need it in my books too. So that is definitely not it. I just wanted to, Ronald asked a question. Asking about the Canine series. Does he need to read it from the beginning or can read the new one first? I try to write each book so that you can leap into the series as if it was a standalone. So anything that you need to know is already in the book itself. So if you want to start with the new one, that's perfectly fine. And I've seen comments from a lot of reviewers saying that it could be read as a standalone. If you want to start from the beginning, the very first book in the series is called Lone Wolf. And I mean, you'll be then sort of more gradually introduced to the characters. But if you want to start with the bow hunting one, sort of catches your eye, and you want to start with that one, you're perfectly fine starting there. There won't be anything there that will lose you from the previous books that isn't already explained.
Nice.
So, I'm curious, Edwin, because you said it took you a long time to write Little Comfort. So was that the very first book you wrote? And did you got it finished and then immediately got an agent and immediately got it published? Like, are you
Oh, Lord, no.
Okay.
I wrote another book like eons ago. I wrote a book in the early 2000s, and I got an agent for that one. I got a very fancy agent, actually. And I was coming out of my MFA program at Emerson College. And we shopped it around New York, and it didn't sell. And it was super discouraging. And I was broke. And I went to work. I went and got a job in publishing. I worked at Houghton Mifflin, and then I worked at Macmillan. And then I worked on, about maybe 6 or 7 years later, I started working on, no, maybe it was about 10 years later, I started working on Little Comfort. But again, I was only dabbling. I was just like sort of trying it here and there, and not taking myself seriously at all. And then I got a new job. I moved from Houghton Mifflin to Macmillan, and I had a month off in between jobs. And so that was when I really sort of hunkered down. I thought to myself, you know what, you've always wanted to try this writing thing. You've got a month off. Let's see what you can do in that month. So I wrote a really bad first draft, totally following the NaNoWriMo thing. I didn't even know what NaNoWriMo was at the time, but I followed it. And I came out of that month with a bad draft, and then I worked on that for a couple of years. And again, you know what, I have to tell you, I got an agent the second time. I got an agent really, really quickly. I don't know why that was the lucky part, but I got an agent. We shopped around New York, and we didn't sell again. So then I had to revise it. And actually, that wound up being kind of fun because I wound up the Little Comfort had a storyline, a secondary storyline about a for-profit college based in Boston that was sort of going down the tubes. And I pulled that secondary story out, and then I spun that up into the novel that's out now, which is called Watcher. And
That's
for
nice.
anyone who doesn't know, the NaNoWriMo is the National Novel Writing Month. And it's a really, really excellent program. If you're looking to jumpstart your writing career, I highly recommend it. It starts on November 1st of every year. So it just ended, but you can prepare for next year. And basically the goal is to write 50,000 words in a month. And so to do that, you have to write 1,666 words per day. And what they do is they have all these support networks set up. There'll be chat rooms and stuff like that. So if you're like falling behind or anything like that, you can find people to support you as you go through it. And for people who it really works for people who it works for. And it won't necessarily, every system doesn't work for everyone, so it may not work for all writers, but for people who like it, it really works for them. So the question was getting into, so it took a very long time for Little Comfort to come out. And then finally finally after that revision, we sold it. And then the series kind of took off from there.
Oh,
How about
great.
you?
So, well, I mean, I actually wrote, well, Anne and I together wrote 5 trunk novels that will never see the light of day. We were just writing for fun. We were just writing for us, and posting stuff online, and we had a little following. And at one point somebody said to us, "Why don't you go professional?" And we kind of looked at each other virtually, and because she lived in Texas at the time, and I'm near Toronto in Canada, and we sort of went, "Why aren't we doing this professionally?" And so. Stephen King says the first 1,000,000 words are practice. And so we had that under our belt at that point. And so we just sort of tossed everything that we'd done so far, started completely from scratch with a new series idea, and wrote Dead Without a Stone to Tell It, which is the first book in the Abbott and Lowell Forensic Mysteries. Got our agent from that. She sold that book, and then that book ended up having 5 books in that series.
Wow.
So we were lucky that we hit on the first book, but that was after 5 books of practice that will never see the light of day. Although like your story about pulling out the for-profit college, there have been bits from those books that I have pulled that, aspects of it have made it into some of our other books, because it was a learning process, and a learning curve is a fantastic thing. And I'm so glad that no one's ever going to see those books. The head hopping was wonderful. But there definitely are aspects of those books that have appeared in other books without it being the whole book itself. So yeah, it's nice to be able to learn and to sort of figure out. And it's also nice to be able to do that without anybody sort of looking at it, without anybody professional looking at it, because you get your feet under you and you figure out what your process is. Unlike you, I do not have a Master's of Fine Arts. I have grade 13 English. So I never even took any English classes in university, because I have an honors biology degree with a minor in mathematics. So there was no time for stuff like English. But I learned how to write from reading like good, really good mystery and thriller authors.
Yep.
And so that's how I learned how structure goes, and that's how I learned how to write, essentially.
Nice.
So, and I'm sure you could say the same thing. I mean, you have the degree, but you also learned by reading, and reading the really good authors.
Yeah. I read all the time, and just looking at the choices that other authors are making, I think that's one of the best ways to sort of teach yourself.
Well, I was really lucky because I grew up with my mother, who had every Agatha Christie novel known to man, and my father, who had all the Earl Stanley Gardners and Arthur Conan Doyle. So like right from the time that I was like about 10 years old, even earlier with Nancy Drews, I was drawn to the mystery and thriller genre, and had some of the golden oldies to sort of cut my teeth on, and that was kind of nice.
Well, my parents are on the call, and I always love to tell this story when they're here. When I was a kid, when they're here, when I was a kid, we always went to the library. We went to the library all the time. But we used to go on these month-long family camping trips. We'd drive across the country. We went up to Canada a couple times. And we would go in this yellow Bronco. And I was 11, I think, and I was making that transition from children's literature to adult books. And we stopped at a gas station. This was back when you could still buy books at gas stations. And my parents bought me a copy of Agatha Christie's The Seven Dials Mystery. And I read it and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the world that she created. I loved the characters. This is one of her older books where it takes place at a manor house. There's a character named Bundle. And I finished it and I thought, that is exactly what I want to do with my life. And it only took me 35 years to actually learn how to do that. So let's see, I'm just looking at these questions.
You're looking at that, yeah.
What was your favorite thing you read last year, and what are you excited to start reading in 2021? Oh, interesting question.
That is a good one.
Oh, I have my favorite book right here. My favorite book was called The Truants by Kate Weinberg. It's a mystery. It's set in the UK. It's set in the UK, and it's sort of a little bit like The Secret History and The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie mashed up into a book set at like a third tier college in East Anglia in the UK. It's about a student who becomes very obsessed with her student. So I love stories about obsession. It's about a group of very smart students who are both very smart and like very annoying at the same time. And she just does a really good job of capturing that period in life. I really love stories that are set in academia.
As far as what my favorite book from last year, I mean, that's tough. I'm actually going to leave the genre. I tend to read fairly widely, or at least I try to. Eric Larson's The Splendid and the Vile that came out last year, which was about London and Churchill during the Battle of Britain, is a fantastic book. It's not a short one. It's quite long. But it's a really intriguing overview of, mostly told sort of from Churchill's, sort of within Churchill's circle, about how England nearly didn't make it through the Battle of Britain and the struggles that they had trying to bring the US into World War II and everything like that. If you've ever read any of Eric Larson's books, Devil in the White City is a fantastic one, because that one's about H.H. Holmes and his murder castle during the World's Fair in, remember, Edwin, was 1880 something? 1888?
I think it's at the very beginning of the 20th century,
Is
but I
it?
can't quite
Okay.
remember.
And it's a fascinating book.
Yeah.
And it's set against the background of the architect of the World's Fair. And so there's sort of like these dueling storylines that go on. Eric Larson is an amazing writer, but this one is very sort of, it's a lot more focused than some of his other books are, and it's just focused on World War II. Fantastic book for those people who like sort of like the narrative nonfiction kind of angle.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. This is a couple local authors to recommend. So this is Joanna Schaffhausen's latest book from last year. It's called All the Best Lies. That's part of a series. She's got a new book coming out at the end of this month, and she'll be here at Belmont Books, I believe. I cannot remember the title of the new book coming up, but she's a terrific local author that I'd highly recommend people look out for. The first book in that series is called The Vanishing Season, and I would recommend starting at the beginning of that series. It's just a really good procedural, not very different from what Jen / Sarah writes, but a really good procedural set right here in Boston. Another really good book that's coming out is one called Symphony Road by Gabriel Valjean, Valjan. And I loved that book. I read an advanced copy of that. It's set in Boston in the 70s, and it's so atmospheric. And I mean, I was like a little baby child in the 70s, but it really captured what I feel like the 70s would be like. And I always have to mention my pal who always supports me, Hank Philippi Ryan. This is her latest book called The First to Lie.
The book that I've just started that I can recommend for 2021, and I recommend all of her books because I really love her, is Louise Penny. And All the Devils Are Here is her newest one, and I've just started that one, and I love Louise. She's fantastic. Also Canadian, yay!
Yes, oh God, she's
and
fantastic.
if you've ever seen her at a conference or at a bookstore event, she is a lovely, gracious lady. And writes this fantastic series of books with Inspector Armand Gamache, normally in Three Pines in Quebec, but in All the Devils Are Here, he's actually gone over to Paris, France to see his son and daughter and their spouses, and of course murder follows him to Paris. So it's sort of a fish out of water because he's not in Three Pines, but I'm really enjoying it. So that's a good one. Someone says I want to move to Three Pines. I agree. Three Pines is wonderful.
When I was a kid, my parents, who are on the call, we used to always go skiing in that area of Canada, in the what are they called, the Eastern Townships.
Right.
Go to Sutton, where of course Louise Penny lived for up until recently, and part of Three Pines is based on Sutton. And so when I discovered that series, I felt like I I really felt like I was coming home because those memories of going skiing there are among my favorite memories. But that series is highly, highly recommended.
Yeah, I know what you mean about when you go somewhere where a series is set. It's been a long time since my husband and I went to England. It was 1993. And one of the high points of that trip for me was going to the Yorkshire Dales, finding where the James Herriot books were set, going to Alf White, who was the real James Herriot, going to his actual surgery. Like that was such a thrill for me because from the little bitty baby, I'd been reading those James Herriot books and loving them, and it was really fantastic to sort of go where those books were set. It was such a joy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a beautiful part of the world to go to as well.
Oh yes, oh so much. I'm kind
Yeah.
of looking at the new. If anybody's seen it, the new All Creatures series is starting on Sunday on PBS.
Oh yeah,
And
I'll be
I love
watching
the
that.
old series. I don't know whether it's gonna sort of stand up to the old series, but I'm just there to, I hardly have time to watch TV. I'm making time for that one, and I just want to see. I want to see the Yorkshire Dales again. It's so beautiful.
So when you started your series, to get back to our own books,
Yeah.
you knew that this was going to be a series, right?
I did. Yeah. For every book that I've written, I've sold them all as, 2 or 3 book series right off the get go. Now, did you know that with your book? Like, I know that, like, I've done some bookstore events with Charlie Don Leah, and like his very first book was supposed to be a standalone, and then surprise, it became a series. Like, was Little Comfort supposed to be a standalone?
No, I conceived it as a series. This
Oh, good.
I've got like so in my series there's a central character, Hester Thursby, and she has a longtime boyfriend named Morgan McGuire, and they live together. So they're the central characters, and then they have this group of people. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned Louise Penny. She's one of my big influences. So much like Louise Penny, the cast of characters grows in the Louise Penny stories,
Hmm.
and they become more and more comfortable with each other. The cast of characters in my books grow as well, as Morgan and Hester sort of collect these people, not in a creepy way, in a nice way. And so one of the things that I've always wanted to, I know the story arc for Hester and Morgan and Kate, who is a child that they're responsible for. I don't know necessarily what the mysteries are that are going to happen to them, but I sort of know where they're going as a couple out for about 8 books. And I knew that from the beginning, sort of these important milestones for their characters.
I think you're planning further out than I am. I'll give you that.
Um,
I sort of the characters. Again, police procedurals, when you're starting to plan a police procedural, you need to make sure that you've got something where you can actually sort of keep going with it if you're going to sort of plan on it. So for the NYPD negotiators, you have to have enough sort of really large hostage situations where you can bring in a team where it can't be just like, I mean, it'd be great if Gemma just talks somebody off of jumping off of a bridge, but that's not a whole book. So you have to have, so for me, in a lot of ways, it's more planning around the actual situations, and then character planning is a whole different thing. But the challenge for me is planning around the situations. The dog planning is actually harder for me because not only does it need to be a case where you'd need to have the dogs involved and stay involved, it has to be a federal case. So there's a couple of layers of difficulty with that one. So yeah, that can sometimes be a bit of a challenge.
I can
Nice
imagine.
challenge, though.
So what is your Mary Finch, hello dear Mary Finch, asks what's next for Hester. So I will tell you right now I'm working on a standalone book. It's also set in Boston. Angela White is part of the story, so it's sort of within the Hester Thursby universe. But Hester and Morgan and Kate are not part of Waffles. They are not part of the story. George may be there. We'll see. So once I finish that, I'm gonna go back to the Hester Thursby series. And for anyone who reads, oh, I should hold it up again. For anyone who reads Watch Her, there's a tiny little cliffhanger at the end. It doesn't have anything to do with the mystery story that you've just read, but it's a cliffhanger that carries you into the next novel. And that cliffhanger will be answered in the following book. But I don't want to tell you what the cliffhanger is.
And so that'll be coming out when? Are we expecting that a year from now, roughly?
Oh, the next Hester Thursby book will not be, sorry, no, it won't be coming out for 2 more years. And I haven't even started it, so
Your
I'm still
reaction pretty
working
much
on the
says it all.
standalone. So what's next for you?
Well, so I all of my books come out on a year, like every year a new one comes out, but then I'm offset by the other series, which also comes out every year. So, so with I'll hold it up again too, with Leave No Trace having just come out. The next book in the series is called Under Pressure, and that will be out winter 2022. That one is all about conflict diamonds and the Philadelphia crime
Oh, wow.
family. Yeah, so that was some fun research.
Oh, I bet. Wow.
Yeah, so that's coming out next winter, and then the second book in the NYPD Negotiators, Shot Caller, will be coming out in August. The first book, now I should have brought it with me. I don't have it on hand. That first book came out in July. It's called Exit Strategy, and it revolves around Gemma Capello, who is a hostage negotiator with the NYPD hostage negotiation team. Again, a real team inside the NYPD. And the hostage negotiation team unit as a whole inside the NYPD handles more cases than any other division inside the department. There's that many sort of hostage negotiation situations, be they domestic violence or bridge jumpers or large scale hostage situations. It's actually the busiest department, busiest unit in the whole department. And so she is part of they always make up a 4-person team, and she's part of this team. And in the first book, in Exit Strategy, there's a hostage negotiation situation that turns up at New York City Hall. In Shot Caller, which is coming out on August 31st, there is a secure unit inside of Rikers Prison, and a riot takes place, and 8 correction officers are taken hostage, as well as some of the inmates inside that unit. So this makes for a pretty tricky situation, because how do you negotiate with a bunch of prisoners who already have a life sentence and don't see anything worse than that coming to them out of their actions? So it makes for a pretty tense situation for Gemma and her hostage negotiation team. So that is Shot Caller, coming out in August.
Wow, that sounds intense.
Yeah. When it comes to research, let me tell you that I couldn't get onto Rikers Island for that research, and I tried. Tried really hard. They would not go for it.
Well,
So,
let me ask everyone who came, any questions for us? If you have them, you can just stick them into the chat box.
thank you to you all for coming.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for coming.
And thank you to Belmont for hosting.
So let me ask you this last question. What advice would you give aspiring writers?
Oh boy, so much advice. I think the first thing that I would say is, if this is really what you want to do, then stick with it and persevere. Edwin was lucky enough to get 2 agents, fancy agents, really quickly. My agent was number 144 on my list. I queried for 6 months and just kept going until I found an agent. Now, once I found Nicole Ressanidi from the Seymour Agency, it took 3 weeks for her to sign me. So it's all a matter of like finding the right fit and that kind of thing. So becoming a writer, getting into traditional publishing, it can be hard, but if that's really what you want to do, and kind of like Edwin had said, like, you thought you'd give it your all in writing during that 1 month. My slogan with writing that first book was go big or go home. I didn't want to look back on it 15 years from now and think, why didn't I even try? So if that's really what you want to do, just stick with it and keep at it and keep learning and keep getting better, and you never know what'll happen. What about you? What's your advice?
I usually say perseverance, but that's basically what you just said.
Sorry.
But I will say this: when you write a novel, put it away.
Oh yeah.
Let it sit, and then look at it again in a few months. And while it's away, start another novel. Do what Jen does. Do what Jen does, and like just keep going. Because even if that first novel isn't quite as like Jen did, I have 1 drawer novel. Jen has 5. So even if like that first novel isn't quite what you want it to be, just like keep going, moving forward, because because you learn how to write just like you learn how to do anything, and you learn how to do it by doing it.
Yeah.
But if you think your novel's done, put it away and come back to it in a few months before you start sending it out to agents. You really only get one chance with an agent. So, make sure that it's the best product that you can possibly send to them. And also make sure that you have a team that looks at it before it goes out to agents. You always need a team. Writing is a team sport, which people think it's an individual sport, but it's actually a team sport. That was a lot of
And
advice.
you'd be amazed at how a little distance makes you look at a manuscript differently.
Yes, yes.
You're so attached to it, then you come back to it a month later and you're like, why did I write that?
Sorry.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi, I was
Stacey.
just going to ask a question. So writing communities are so important to many writers. I know, whether it's a writing group or just a bigger writing community like Grub Street here. How do you find that during the pandemic? Any advice about that?
That's a good question. I mean, it's how I found Anne too. Online writing communities are great, flourishing communities. And if you are a member of, for me, it's the Crime Writers of Canada, there's Sisters in Crime, there's Mystery Writers of America, you can find some great groups within those associations.
I would, I'm super shy, which people don't know, but it's true. And so like writers like are usually really nice and are really willing to help and to reach out. So, I've dipped into Grub here and there. And lately during the pandemic, I really kind of went all in with Grub, and it's been great. I've been taking a class with a great group of people. It's been very, very supportive. For anyone who doesn't know, Grub Street is a Boston-based writing institution, and it's like really, really awesome. But also, again, like with mystery writers, there's lots of local and national organizations and international organizations that you can join and start getting to know people who are trying to do what you're trying to do.
Thank you. All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so I will say to Jen and Edwin, thank you both so much for joining us, and really interesting discussion. And to everybody who came to listen, thank you so much, and thanks for your great questions. Stay safe, and we hope to see you at other events.
Well, thank you, Stacy. And if I could just say, I learned this the other day. It's not a fun statistic, but I learned that one independent bookstore per day is going out of business in the United States. So what we all need to do, book lovers, is shop local. Please find a local bookstore like Belmont Books and buy your books there, whether they're mine or someone else's.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.